Well, I hope that all of you in this room are more enlightened than that, have been engaged in it, but that's not what it's going to do. It's more of a middle mile project of a high-speed information communication infrastructure, and that will obviously terminate at certain points in various communities around the state and with state institutions. But how do you, again, as a community leader, how do you know where it's going to be in your neighborhood? Do you know how to communicate that to your constituents and to your voters and to your business people? Well, if you don't, we have someone here today that's going to tell you the answers to all of that. It is Mike Hayden, and he is the COO, and Mike, you can be making your way up here, of the Kentucky Communications Network Authority. He oversees and maintains the Commonwealth's open access broadband network, known as KentuckyWired. Preceding this appointment, he was with the Commonwealth of Kentucky's Finance and Administration and served in the Technology and Communications position. I've known Mike for a number of years. Mike joined the Commonwealth from Windstream Communication, where he was a Division Vice President of Operations for New York and Pennsylvania. He and his wife, Patty, reside in Simpsonville, not in the metropolitan area of Louisville, so in a small town. We're very, very fortunate. I don't know, frankly, of anyone that knows the inside out, the beginnings, the middle, and where we're at today of this KentuckyWired project. Anyone that it could be better able to talk to you, answer your questions than that of Mike Hayden. Give him a warm welcome.
Get myself set up here. It's always good when technology doesn't work. My presentation just died on the screen, so out of batteries. No, I can do it from here, no problem. Thanks. I see a lot of faces around the room that I've worked with on this project over the last 3 years, and even some that I've worked with in my previous roles longer than that, in lots of different capacities. I look at, and I have to think that the experiences that I went through in my first 30-something years working for telephone companies and others prepared me better to serve the Commonwealth in the capacity I'm in now. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for KCNA. KCNA was put in place by Governor Beshear via Executive Order 2015, ultimately codified within the new organization, Bevan organization, this past year. We've got a new executive director. I think he participated in the 101 session, Philip Brown. He came from the Tourism Academy, has a very good understanding of the politics within Frankfort, which is very important. In my previous roles and my previous working relationships with other folks, I handle the techie stuff. Somebody else handles the politics. That's not my forte. My job is to ultimately build a network that works for the Commonwealth, ultimately that makes it shareable for a lot of folks in the room going forward. So again, I'm happy to be here. The original project, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but 3,000 miles of fiber, roughly about 1,100 endpoints across the Commonwealth. It's got an access point in all 120 counties. The backbone itself is large capacity fiber. Looking around the room, especially for some of the older telephone guys as opposed to you new guys, when us old guys built fiber out years ago, 12 strands was all we thought we'd ever need to be able to connect, London to Hazard or otherwise. I think there are lessons learned in that while you're building fiber in today's world, put as much as you can up because the cost of the fiber itself is pennies on the dollar. So that's kind of what we did when we looked at this. Our initial focus of this whole project in its infancy was really looking at how we could better serve the agencies of the Commonwealth, so in turn we could serve the citizens and communities. What we found was that we were in a long-term contract, been in place for many years, and a bit of history. I happen to be the director from Bell South back in the old days that put together a consortium of a whole bunch of telephone companies that have been serving the Commonwealth for close to 30 years now in different contracts. We looked around at lease versus own model, much the same as you might look at in your own purchasing decision of a car. Ultimately, we looked at the financials and determined over the 30-year term going forward, it was more prudent for us to own our facilities, our networks, versus continuation of lease. We made that decision. We did the financials and economics and made that decision, within the Bashir organization. We decided that as we started to build this, and I have to look over at Tom Asp over in the corner. Tom was in CTC. We're partners in our original planning dimensions. They helped us to put together our initial RFIs, RFPs, and everything else that culminated into where we are today. So thank you, Tom, for your energies and efforts in CTCs. They do a great job of helping folks understand technology. But we looked at it and said, we could in essence go out and build a network to serve our own on, very thin. We could put 4 or 5 strands of fiber up, enter into long-term leases with multiple companies, and cobble together something that would ultimately build our needs. But what we found was, in our cross sections of looking across the Commonwealth, we found that there were very, very good islands of technology within the Commonwealth. East Kentucky Network Groups, you guys have done a great job in your service territory of building out your communities. Have to apply those efforts. Other companies have done the same. Some of the cable companies have done a tremendous job. But really, we determined that there were islands. There was not a single network, affordable single network, that could link Ashland to Paducah, Cincinnati, down south to Williamstown. It just wasn't there. So we looked at taking where we were going to build, because we were going to build into these communities anyway, building a robust middle mile network that was future-proof in our determination. And I'll never say never, but I don't think we'll ever run out of fiber to serve the Commonwealth's needs in the term of this contract. We'll have the use of 144 strands of fiber for our own government use ongoing. We made a decision at that point in time, again, back to that kind of precedent, that building fiber or the cost is in the construction, not the fiber. As we contemplated building our 144 strands, we said, let's just double it. So we opted to go with a 288 count fiber across our backbone, and I'll point to the map a little bit. Apologize if you can't see it real well. But the red, pink lines there are our backbone. That's the 288 count fiber that goes across the Commonwealth. It goes into multiple nodes, and I'll get into more detail specifically of what those are and the benefit and the purposes of those particular nodes. But as we decided to build that 288, we left 144 strands available for wholesale open access. Commonwealth didn't contemplate it as a revenue stream for the Commonwealth. Never was our intent. Our intent was that, again, back to the telephone company days, and you guys, anybody that has computers today, the obsolescence factor of equipment itself has got a lifespan of anywhere from 5 to 10 years. So we looked at it to say that we can build fiber in the ground very economically. It's got a 30-year plus life. We've got a warranty from Corning Fiber that gives us a 30-year warranty on that fiber. But the equipment that we use to light it up, we're going to have to refresh that. We're going to have to turn it over into years 10 and years 20 just to make sure that we're have state of the art as we move forward. And I could probably guess that 10 years is too long, but economically that's what we decided to do. That's going to require another 80 to 120 million dollars over the term of the contract to refresh. Instead of putting that into our initial contract and trying to borrow for the purposes of that future, we decided we'd use this wholesale access. We would monetize that wholesale access for the benefit of being able to continue to refresh our network. So that's the whole intent of the Commonwealth's use of that spare capacity in fiber for our own purposes. The secondary purposes, and where it really becomes important to the folks in the audience, is the use of that fiber to stimulate activity within your communities. Middle mile fiber, I always like to use Harlan as my showpiece working example, as a working example of an opportunity of need. Anybody from Harlan in the room? Anyway, you from Harlan? Okay. So Harlan Community Television, local service provider within the marketplace. Several years ago, the FCC put out a request for information of sorts that really wanted to get input from communities, others, as to the real cost of middle mile fiber and the cost to serve broadband within their communities. Harlan Community Television responded to that and indicated that for their use to be able to serve roughly the 1,200 or so customers that they served, they paid somewhere about $15,000 to $18,000 a month for really very low bandwidth capacity to be able to serve that. So it was an extremely expensive proposition for Harlan to be able to do that. The middle mile network, of which we'll continue to lay out, will allow opportunities for Harlan Community Television, others, Roy Access Cables back here, and many others to be able to potentially lower their cost of goods for service providers to be able to provide services, broadband services to citizens and other government end users. So that's really kind of the reason, rationale that we did it, why we did it. The wholesale access, and I'll go into a little deeper. One of the things that we laid out, and I'll have to be perfectly frank, when we signed the initial contracts, we were extremely optimistic in what we considered to be a realistic timeline to build out. And I look at Alan Gillum back in the room, and a couple years ago he told us we were crazy. Alan, you're right. It takes a little longer than what we had probably set up to do. We had envisioned that we could build a 3,000-mile network, light up 1,100 endpoints within about a 3.5 year span. Well, lessons learned, that's not going to happen. So we're working through the mechanics of our contracts and what we'll end up doing to be able to move forward with that reality. The reality of this network, really, we look at it, we talked about some of the other things. I think the I-75 through London was an example. This project is the largest single project that the Commonwealth of Kentucky has undertaken in its 225-year history. And to expect that we would do that in 3.5 years, shame on us, we were naive. However, the benefits of that naivety and the extended timelines is really reaped some good rewards. Within this map, can't hardly see it, I apologize, but over in the far East Kentucky, we were able to work with the East Kentucky Network Group to enter into a service contract of which basically we lease fiber from them. Lowers our cost of entry, it gets the network built faster. It gives them a revenue stream viability that's positive for their side of it, but it's enabled us to be able to reach out to the service providers and the infrastructure providers across the Commonwealth to determine, is there a partnership that works for us collectively to allow us to work together towards the same benefit, and it has. East Kentucky, an example. We did the same within Central Kentucky with the Bluegrass Network Group, another group of 5 telephone companies. We did the same up in Northern Kentucky with Cincinnati Bell. We're actively in negotiations and finalization of contracts in Western Kentucky with many partners within West Kentucky. We continue to have daily dialogue with other service providers in East Kentucky, Central Kentucky, Northern Kentucky, and West Kentucky. So the opportunity to partner, ultimately to engage Kentucky workforce, Kentucky citizens more actively in this project, the delays have allowed us to do that. So while we were naive, I think there's some positive end results of that, and I feel good about that. The wholesale opportunities, as we've looked at it, it also allowed us to have some active discussions with some very large wholesale potential customers that look at, how will they utilize this network to be able to go and better their business plan. Amazon, one company, Amazon's got distribution centers within Kentucky. We're talking to them at different levels within the Commonwealth, both on an economic development vantage point, on an infrastructure vantage point, and others to be able to utilize portions of this network that may bring more of Amazon into the communities. May happen, may not. At the end of the day, Amazon will have to create that own business plan. So let me move forward. Larry told me that my purpose today was to do a deeper dive into what Philip had done in the one-on-one session, to get into some of the nuts and bolts of the network itself, to answer any questions that you may have. So if I missed the mark, questions and answers at the end, make sure we've got them. I'll try to take all the time we need to clear up any confusion that you've got on it. But we talked about a couple of the key components, the backbone fiber, the nodes, Laterals and spurs are just working terms of which we use within the business. So our nodes, in the previous map, we looked at the orange, the pink and red lines, 288 count. It serves, across the Commonwealth. It links together 21 nodes. So those nodes, what do they represent? If you're in the business to be able to do anything with fiber, you got to be able to light it up, put electronics on it to make it do something. So at these nodes, and those nodes are either in Morehead State University as a co-location point for us, University of Kentucky, University of Louisville, so our state universities are all co-location entry points, nodes for the network. We also will deploy roughly about 17 huts. And somewhere in this deck, well, down at the bottom there, that's a picture of a hut being actually deployed. I believe that was in E-Town. So it's a telecommunications hut. Anybody that's driven along highways, you've seen them. You may not have paid attention to it, but it's a fairly large, environmentally controlled vault, concrete infrastructure of which we'll bring our fibers in, terminate the fibers, put our equipment in it, and then ultimately that becomes a concentration aggregation point for the network itself. So 21 of those distributed across the Commonwealth, either in community colleges, properties, co-located in regional universities. There's a few of them that are state government locations. The Commonwealth Data Center in Frankfort is a core hub for everything we do in Frankfort, so we had to have that particular location online as we built the network out. We're using a couple Department of Transportation sites where they had real estate and land available for us to the benefit of being able to deploy a hut. Within those huts, we put equipment. So it's a mix of both Fujitsu electronics, dense wave division multiplex for the techies in the room. That allows you to take a single thread of fiber and multiplex it to, today's technology. I don't know, keep me straight back there, 80, 100 gig links at a minimum across a single strand. So lots of capacity. When you start looking at 288 strands of fiber and you put the multiplexers in place, it gives you 80 times 100 gig. It's just a whole bunch of capacity to be able to build it out. So the technology and the equipment we put in us allows us to do that and continues to make sure that the speeds and services that we'll provide to our state government entities will always be enough to serve their needs. We're working with the area office of the court, administrative office of the courts, CHFS, the Human Services Division, and many of these agencies really have their hands tied as far as their use of technology as an application. They just don't have enough bandwidth to be able to do what they need. Voice over IP is a tremendous opportunity to provide efficiencies and economy into the ways that the Commonwealth uses telephone services across the Commonwealth. The court systems are actively using much more video surveillance for lots of different things, video arraignment, depositions, all of those. All that requires significant amounts of bandwidth, of which, again, under the current cost and pricing of what we had, it was just unaffordable for those agencies to buy enough bandwidth to be able to do it. It wasn't a purpose, a matter of not available. I think, Alan and others in the room said, you guys could build 100 gig link to anywhere we wanted to if we asked you to, at a cost. It just wasn't there. So that's why we went into the own model. We decided to go ahead and put our own equipment in to service our own. And that equipment is there for government use. It will serve the higher education communities and our government communities. When we get below that, there's some other component pieces. You got to have routers to be able to make the packets go where you want them to go, ultimately to the internet or to the Commonwealth Data Center to get to the EMARS applications or time CRIS services or anybody, within state government, we've got a long list of acronyms of all these applications, and I'm sure, with any other community, you got the same type of arrangement. It's all driven by the application and the requirements to be able to serve that application. The laterals themselves, just looking at the map, so the blue lines going into the counties, we define those as our laterals. The EKN group, as an example, over in East Kentucky, they will be building a lot of those laterals, of which they will take the opportunity to build additional capacity so that it enhances their own business case to serve their citizens. But then it allows us to lease a minimum amount of capacity, enough to serve our needs, at a reduced cost and timeline. So it's a good opportunity for us to work together. Beyond that, then, it goes down into a service level, and I've touched a little bit on those. So the sites and spurs, I'm going forward on these. I'm going to use Moorhead as an example. This is just a snapshot of a spreadsheet that I use on a daily basis. I've got 1,100 endpoints within this spreadsheet that, we use it to track the sites that we're bringing online and everything else. There's roughly 13 sites, government, education, mixed-use sites within Moorhead. Our intent was today we pay, under our KH3 AT&T contract, we pay our service provider for that. At the end of this construction period, we'll end up serving these our own with our own fiber. At each endpoint, we'll put a cabinet of equipment within there that basically takes that fiber, terminates it, lights it up, provides all the capacity and everything we need on the equipment side of it. So it'll be analogous to the computer again. It's got a location life of 7 to 10 years. We'll change it out in some period of time, all 1,100 endpoints as well as all the networks in the middle. So that will all be changed out. Within the partnerships, the third-party partnerships, Alan, I keep pointing to you guys, you're in the room. They're building those laterals going down from our backbone, so the state will be responsible today for the backbone build. The nodes is still the state responsibility. Mountain Rural Telephone, as an example, will build those laterals, those fibers, maybe a 96 count, maybe a 144 count, maybe down to 24 as it gets down to the endpoints. Ultimately, we're leasing enough capacity to be able to serve whatever it is on the end of that county. 13 here in Moorhead. You go into some of the other counties, communities and counties, it may be 5 to 6 endpoints and locations. So each of those requires a pair of fibers. Our agreement with the third parties, East Kentucky in this example, allows us to lease that capacity from them over the 30-year term. We continue to own the end equipment and light that. East Kentucky will manage it, so if there's a fiber cut somewhere within the laterals that they build, they're responsible to go out and fix it. Again, local workforce doing things great for the things that they do. Shift gears a little bit. Our contract itself, when we looked at it, I'll get back to this point. Touched a little bit about the middle mile capacity for wholesale. As we contemplated building this out, we looked at several models, and what we left away with was what we call an open access model. Those 144 strands of which we'll build out will be made available on an open access basis, so literally anybody, Joe Citizen, Tom Ass Telecommunications Company, East Kentucky Network, or others will be able to have the benefit of leasing capacity across that network on an open access basis. Same common terms and conditions for everybody, so it doesn't give the big boys, I won't shoot fingers, but won't give the big boys in the room the opportunity to come in and buy all the capacity and starve the market. We'll make sure that there's enough capacity and it's doled out on a basis that no single provider will be able to control the marketplace, this whole middle mile capacity marketplace. So some good things on that side. We're still working through our mechanics associated with it. To me, I'm more concerned with getting the network that's built versus the next step of wholesale access and those other revenue streams. But it does allow us to move forward and do that. We're envisioning potentially an auction process similar to spectrum auction at the FCC. We'll hold out capacity across the network on an open access auction basis to be able to let, again, Tom Ass Telephone Company or the likes of Verizon Communications to come in and lease capacity in this network. One of the other things I failed to touch on as I look out in the room, as we built this additional capacity through here and some of the benefits of the delay, it's really allowed us to get closer to the communities itself. I look at Mary Trent as an example. If we had been on track with building our network within that 3-year timeline, the opportunity for the Commonwealth to partner with Moorhead, Rowan County, and others to be able to piggyback our construction through the community and allowing them to have some of their own capacity. So we've worked memorandums of understanding with multiple communities that basically what we'll do is we build this 288 count backbone through the community. Remember, the cost is in the construction, it's the labor force to do it. We'll increment that cable count by its next increment, and typically that's an additional 144 strands, so we'll increment our 288 up to a 432 count under a lease arrangement, of which basically the cities will be obligated to pay the incremental cost of whatever it is over and above what the Commonwealth has paid for the backbone. It allows them to have the use of their own dark fiber across their communities. You look at a community the size of Louisville as an example. Roughly they're looking at close to 75 miles of fiber that they will deploy using this model. It will allow them to take advantage of some federal grants to do some traffic control, surveillance, lots of different things that are going to be key and beneficial to them within their community. Same model would hold true within Moorhead and others. It gives, again, the communities the exclusive use of that fiber to be able to serve industrial parks to, the city hall and whatever it might be. So it's just another opportunity to partner together that would not have been in place had we been on that 3-year timeline. Because what that 3-year timeline would have dictated is I would have had to have gone out and ordered enough 288 count fiber to be able to meet my project plan and not deviate. As a result of delays, it gave me a little bit of timeline. I've probably overspent some capacity and have opportunity to be able to work continuously with other communities to give the same advantage. So, talked about the service model a little bit. Point back. Within our service model, the backbone itself, all that, the red lines on the map, we entered into a contract, a 30-year term with our service provider. They have the requirements today to, if there's a fiber break on that 288 backbone, to go out and restore it, work with the local utilities, power companies or otherwise, to make sure that the poles are placed and everything else. That's under a 30-year contract. Within that same umbrella, we engaged under the contract with another service provider that's responsible for all the end equipment, so network operation centers and everything, and the coordination efforts with our third parties, EKN in this example, so that if there's a break within the EKN fiber down on the laterals, they're talking together, the network operation centers are working together to make sure that the restoral happens and ultimately notify customers that service is back up and everything associated with that. That's a continued 30-year term of which it's under an agreement. We have opportunity within that 30-year agreement to literally change out partners at every 10 years. So at the opportunity where our equipment becomes obsolete, we also have the opportunity to refresh our service partners. So, sometimes long-term contracts don't work out. We wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity that at a minimum at a third-year period, 10-year periods, if we weren't happy with the service performance, but it wasn't to the extent of a contract breach or anything, catastrophic that way, we could put it out for a rebid, bring a different partner in. So. A little bit on that, I'm jumping back and forth, I apologize. That was the benefit of having my phone in front of me, I knew where I was. On that middle mile component piece, as we build the network out, the 288 count fiber as well as the laterals, part of our agreement with third parties was provide a minimum amount of quantity and count of dark fiber with no service restrictions such that we can continue with basically our commitment to the Commonwealth to be able to provide open access into a community. Competitive, otherwise, it can be in there. There's that plan is still in place, even when we work with our third parties. It gives them the opportunity under a contract arrangement that if there's a new customer that's coming into town that needs to extend that fiber, the East Kentucky Network companies have the opportunity to basically look at it, have the first right to be able to play into that one. Gives that local provider the opportunity to play fairly and equitably within that, and then use Kentucky-based labor to service that need. So I think it was an important component piece of our contract as we move forward. But architecturally, as we build and getting into the weeds, Larry told me to get in the weeds, we'll have slack loops or splice points along this fiber within the fiber that we'll build, the 288, roughly about every quarter mile. probably lessons learned talking to Tom and his company, as well as Alan and some of that. I mean, Alan shared that during the last ice storm, the fiber network, the East Kentucky network deployed, didn't miss a lick when the ice storm came through, because they did a good job of planning for enough slack within the network, so if poles fell down or trees fall on and makes the poles break, there's enough slack to keep the fiber intact. It doesn't pull out and you don't break it. So, good learning on that side. We took advantage of that. So our fiber will have slack loops at about every quarter mile. Those slack loops and splice points become opportunities across this whole network for that open access piece, such that if Amazon comes in and wants to put a new utility hub facility somewhere in Round Counties out near the industrial park or wherever, there's an opportunity, as an example, to go to that nearest quarter-mile link, extend the fiber via East Kentucky network, perhaps, to extend it to that new facility, then service Amazon or whoever the customer may be, and it reduces that overall net cost on the back end of it, such that that customer may not be looking at having to build or lease something from Moorhead all the way to Lexington in an example. So it improves the dynamics and economics from an economic development vantage point, we think, to be able to entice companies to come to Kentucky. Some challenges, rolling towards the end of what I have to talk about, and then I'll open up for questions. As we built and contemplated building 3,000 miles of fiber to 1,100 endpoints, we quickly determined, we knew, advice from CTC, we had to engage in 70 different pole attachment agreements. There's 70 different owners of poles across Commonwealth. So individual negotiations with each of those companies to get there were roughly about 85% done. The remainings were 100% done over in East Kentucky, Central Kentucky. We've got some remaining ones over in West Kentucky, which again, our phasing is in our last phases. Most of those are kind of tied up in some active negotiations and some similar partnerships as we're doing with East Kentucky, such that we're sharing an infrastructure, we're doing some co-builds. We'll share fibers with them for some links that they need to get to Louisville or Lexington to service their bulk commodity internet needs. We'll trade that for some construction and our use, and it just works out as a favorable arrangement for all parties. So 70 individual pole attachment agreements, roughly about 85,000 poles represented in that arrangement. As you traverse the Commonwealth, you would think that this network is built on kind of an 85% aerial and 15% underground model. You would think that with the availability of state right-of-way and us as a state entity, it'd be pretty much free and clear to be able to build it out universally. What we found was not the case. As it seems that, there's a lot of private easements that are crossed across this whole network, roughly about 42,000 of them across the whole Commonwealth. We could take an approach perhaps similar to some service providers where just go out and build it. It's only a little wire on a pole. Don't worry about it. Do you need an easement or not? Because we're the Commonwealth and perhaps we're conservative in our approach relative to keeping things, 100%, that we service our citizens, we're not taking things unfairly or otherwise. We're working on those easements. We hope that the citizens of the Commonwealth will see that this is a public benefit project. And many of those 42,000 have already stepped up and said, yeah, we'll sign an easement, free and clear, no dollar exchange or anything. We've got others, as an example, that probably aren't as friendly. I always like to characterize it. It's the state truck of money's pulled up and somebody wants to take a grab. It is what it is. People are people. We knew that. So using Moorhead as an example, and really this is coming in and out of Moorhead in directions and the laterals to be able to serve the adjoining counties out of that. I didn't count it up totally, I did. Roughly about 810 easements to serve through county to county, Rowan County, end to end, through Moorhead and everything else for the particular links. We've got 703 of those already under an easement contract. They readily agreed to to sign a piece of paper to say that we grant easement for you to place your facilities across our land or otherwise. There's still 107 remaining in Brown County. I look at Larry, wherever Larry is, over here. Part of the financials associated with this deal was that the Center for Rural Development, in conjunction with USDA, Congressman Rogers' benefit, brought roughly $23.5 million of funding into it. Part of that $23.5 million builds the lower portions of that Ring 2 over in southeast Kentucky. So beginning at Somerset, going over to Pikeville, then coming back around ultimately through Corbin, back up to Somerset again. The requirements of that money dictates that, you know, all easements have to be in place, all right-of-way has to be in place, all that has to be perfected before they will give us money back in exchange for that. So it's critically important to Larry. As equally as important to me, because that's $2,300 or $23 million gap if we don't deliver in the project plan. Within that, if I look at a similar example for here, if I go from Somerset to London, there's about 313 easements that are still outstanding that we're going to have to work through before we're going to get a dollar from the federal government. So those all take time and energy, but, you know, one of my asks is community leaders, citizens otherwise, you know, if somebody knocks on your door and says, KentuckyWired is asking for an easement, is that a good thing? Please assure them that it is. I mean, that's all I can ask for you. Please take that initiative to at least, you know, give us a warm acknowledgement that this is a public project. We're not taking land. We're putting a wire across your property. You can't always see it. I mean, we've had, you know, don't put any bad examples out, but companies that want $50,000 for 1,000 foot. And, you know, just outlandish because, again, the Commonwealth's truck money's pulled up to the door and they're getting their grab out of the bag. So, again, those are some of our challenges. Our initial challenges started with pole attachment agreements, getting through those 70. As you might expect, you know, the two big boys in the Commonwealth, big utilities, took a long time to negotiate, caused a significant delay. We ultimately got the contracts done with them, and we're moving forward. Next stages of construction is the make-ready construction. So for every pole that we touch out there, we got to go back and do an engineering analysis associated with it. Make a determination, is the pole big enough to carry the weight that it's on? Is it tall enough to be able to give us road clearances and all that? We're roughly about close to 90% done on most of that make-ready engineering component pieces across the Commonwealth. Next step after all that's done is in the industry called make-ready construction. So typically most poles across the Commonwealth, it's got at a minimum 3 attachments, maybe 4, maybe 7, maybe 10, depending on where you are. Louisville is a tough market to build in because of the amount of competition, the amount of people that are on poles. We have to go in and work with the attachers on that pole. So I'll just use a simple example, Mountain Rural Telephone and Time Warner Cable on a particular pole. In that particular arrangement, and maybe AT&T might have some long haul on that, so 3 different attachers. It's got to be coordinated that each of those people, if there's a requirement to do something new on that pole, either to get clearance, 18 foot of clearance across the roadway, or power, make sure you're separated 40 inches away from your power and all those things that are just normal requirements. It may require a brand new pole to be placed, or it may require each of those companies to go back and physically move their plant to the next position on the pole and coordinate. So as you can imagine, that takes a considerable amount of coordination and effort. So we're working through every component piece of that. And as I mentioned on the front end, roughly about 85,000 poles across this network. So a lot of work there. So if I have to accentuate anything, that as you guys look at the complexities of doing anything with the community, take time to plan. Make sure you listen to your consultants. You know, when they tell you that a pole attachment or whatever it might be, it's going to, you know, potentially delay you by this amount, listen closely. Thank you, Tom. And all those things. So I'm going to close my discussions here and just open up for Q&A.
Mike, thank you for all you're doing. I know it's You've probably got one of the worst jobs in the state, I think, right now, but I appreciate all you're doing.
Nah, right now I think my boss's job is the worst.
It may be. You mentioned something that was a little bit new to me. I wanted you to clarify if you could. You mentioned that the additional capacity that you're building, that the Commonwealth's not going to, the additional 144 is going to be open access to, you said, anybody. So even a private entity, Amazon, as an example you mentioned, could get broadband access directly from KCNA.
Let me back up on that. Not broadband access. I mean, we got to clarify the terminology.
Okay.
When we talk broadband access typically means I can push a button, I can access the internet.
Right.
We're talking about transport. We're talking about the pipe that it takes to be able to get between point A and point B.
Yeah, so Amazon could build their own last mile from
Correct.
the Commonwealth's middle mile and just pay you for access to it.
They could. Yeah.
The reason that's important to me is say London builds their last mile network, and we've got a group of banks that are regional that have incentive to have their network statewide connected. And what's to keep them from just saying, let's just cut out London and just go directly to KCNA and build our own last mile, and we would that would impact our business model if we lost that opportunity to have them as a customer.
Yeah. I mean, generally, we're a statewide middle mile network. So typically, we're not don't even profess to be competitive in the marketplace, the wholesale provider within the confines of London or a single county or anything else. But to the extent that, it's a statewide entity that requires a statewide presence, even if London wanted to do the last mile component pieces under contract, it's still going to require some middle mile.
Right.
So we would see that if London wanted to take on that customer initiative to be able to create that statewide network, you're still going to need a middle mile component. The middle mile that we're building will allow you to do that and allow you to engage more broadly into the marketplace on a statewide basis that you may not have had an opportunity before.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Either 144 or 288 circuits is a bunch, but every fiber circuit takes 2 strands. So when you say you've got 288 strands, you net out to 144 circuits.
Yeah, you have
Is
to
that
divide it in half to be able to get it in a bidirectional scope. So, but nonetheless, every strand has the capacity with the electronics to be able to get at a minimum today's electronics.
I mean, that's a lot of capacity. There's no doubt about it.
Tons of capacity.
Assume that an ISP wants to get to some of your dark fiber. Do they just rent the fiber and then it's up to them to buy the bandwidth on the other end of the fiber, or are they buying?
Correct.
Okay.
That's the model. We're transport only. We're not an internet service provider, don't profess to or will compete in the marketplace for that particular component piece. So we look at, hopefully that would enhance the opportunities for ISPs to be able to come into the market, lowers the cost of their transport back to where the common internet drains are, pushes those internet drains out closer to the communities.
Right back here.
Just to clarify, you said 85%, 15% overhead and underground, and 85,000 poles. Is that the estimate up front, or is that what it actually was? And of the 85,000 poles, was that total joint use change out, or was that just how many you touched?
Total amount of poles touched. We won't own any poles. So
Yeah, you touched 85,000 poles. How many were joint users and had to have follow-up work on them, or do you know?
I don't have that number in front of me. A good bit of them, as you might expect, depending on the cross-section and how many existing attachers and age of the plant, lots of different variables that would dictate that. But,
Is it right? Once somebody is a legal ISP, they're going to have to provide their own electronics on the end of the fiber. But if there's the hut that you come into the county that's out at what we call the
Moorhead.
top of the, it's some spot,
Right.
and there is a state office 10 miles away and a county office across the street, is there any way that this ISP can connect at the state office with their fiber and then run to the county office or to their other
Depending on our
customers?
arrangement, and it's unique in some of our third-party agreements as to where that entry point is. In some of the counties, we'll have a single access point, generally centrally within the county itself. We'll also have points across the backbone if it crosses that county. There's many counties that the backbone doesn't, traverse. In those particular arrangement, you'll have a central point of access deemed collectively with our service provider, our third party, on the entities of which the Commonwealth will continue to build out the network. Those quarter-mile slack loops, those represent egress points of which an ISP then could, link into the network at that point under a lease arrangement across the street from the courthouse in your example, pick it up there and then extend to wherever they need to.
Okay.
If they're looking for, a next layer and within this service arrangement, we're looking at a DIM service, so lambdas. I'm sorry.
I don't want to have to build fiber right beside your fiber.
Right, that's part of what we're trying to accomplish.
Mike, as I've traveled around, there are a lot of local leaders, I say, that said, I don't know when it's coming, I don't know where it's coming to my community. Did they call you?
I can explicitly address the where. So on our homepage, KentuckyWired.ky.gov, there's a link out there that's got a KMZ file. So it's a Google Earth map of which you can drill down at street level and look at the county clerk's office in Moorhead and say, the entry's going into this location. Or blow it up and look at the whole state and you can determine what interstates, or not interstates, what, state roads it's following, all the interchanges, where all the laterals go, and everything associated with it to get to that level on that map. The when is still where we're working towards right now, is understanding, again, the complexities of the delays that we had. I mean, to be perfectly frank, we got delays to re-baseline our contract with our service contractors to say that instead of 2018 to be completed and 2016 for rings 1A and 1B, it's now 2018 and 2020. Again, I don't know where we're going to end up. Those are active discussions and negotiations that are ongoing. If you look at it, that comes with not only time but money. So one of our commitments to the legislature and citizens was, we weren't piggybacking new tax or anything else associated with this. So our intent is to still leverage everything that we've got in play such that the network is self-funded in its entirety. We don't want to go back and ask for, another $30 million, $50 million, $80 million of legislative authorization and approval that ultimately could materialize in taxes or otherwise for the network itself. So we're working through all those mechanics within our contracts with lenders and everybody else that you might think that to be able to unwind that one and put it back in place again.
This may be kind of down in the weeds too, but if you're going through an area where you're going to have a local provider that you're going to end up working with, is there an opportunity, depending on timing, I guess, for collaboration on splice locations, that kind of thing?
Yes. I mean, I say that with some reservation. There's a time of which I've got to lock in my network design. So Moorhead is an example. We'll work with the city to determine where are the best drop-off points across their 144 strands that they'll use for that, and then work with them to say, here's your best. And as we construct, part of our financials of which we laid out for these community accesses, includes component pieces of local splice, individual splice points and everything else associated with it, with the understanding that it's not going to be our fixed model of every quarter mile. It may be that it needs to get to the industrial park over on this side and somewhere downtown and wherever it might be. So the real answer is yes, but there's a window of opportunity there that we have to make sure that we cover up on. So if you have a need, go to our website, reach out to me, whatever, and we'll see what we can do with you.
Mike, you had mentioned that several communities have taken advantage of this overbuild opportunity that exists with the Commonwealth of Kentucky. What's the cutoff date for that? I know that fiber is 50 months out? You have to order it?
Fiber's running about 52 to 55 weeks right now. I took a risk for the benefit of communities, probably really when I started working with the two gentlemen at the front of the room, knowing that there are going to be other communities that will want to take advantage of this. I pre-ordered roughly about 125 miles of 432 count fiber under the Commonwealth's risk that we want to be good partners with communities. There may be others. So it's in the pipeline, ordering pipeline with Corning to be able to service that. At some point, I have to look at it and say, I've run out of fiber. I mean, I don't know when that is at this point in time. It's all very dependent on how much we build across it. But it kind of took away that timeline issue. I pre-ordered 125 miles. It's in the manufacturer's pipeline. We'll get it. If we use it effectively, we use all 125 miles. If we don't, I'll eat some risk. Is that the same opportunity for private companies as for communities? I'll have to consider that. My initial answer is no, but I'll have to consider that again in the discussions. The only reason I say that is that, I mean, as we speak, and the only reason I really say that is as we enter into a third-party agreement, it's built on a financial valuation at its beginning point to say that as I work with Alan and his companies, is the cost benefit to the Commonwealth more favorable than what it would be if I built it my own? And we take that valuation very literally to do that economics. So I'm willing to work with anybody within the room, service provider or otherwise, and there's several of you in the room I'm still working with, that ultimately we'll come to the terms and conditions that say that you want to do this, either via equitable trade or whatever it may be. I've got working models that go from A to Z in reality as to what we're working on. We'll do that same valuation. In some cases, the Commonwealth does provide the fiber, and the companies construct for us. In some models, the Commonwealth owns the fiber. The third party maintains it. In some models, the third party owns the fiber and we lease it. So we've got to sit down individually and under every case and make a determination using that valuation model. Does it make sense for the Commonwealth to do this?
Was your question geared toward providing that service, or were you looking at the opportunity to secure some extra fiber through the overbuild?
Asking more about providing some of that extra fiber during the overbuild for our own purposes.
I'm gonna reserve reservations and say we'll consider it. I have to think through all the dynamics of that and, a public versus private model, and see if it's something that we can do constitutionally and otherwise. I mean, I've got an attorney sitting on my shoulder saying, watch what you say. I won't work with everybody. I'm willing to work with anybody. Again, I got to do it within the reserves of what I can and can't do.
Mike, I asked you this question, I think, at our last meeting in Lexington. And now I've got Mr. Ison and Mr. Gillum in the room. Maybe I can get an answer. They're going to be running line fiber from West Liberty to the university, correct? Is that correct? Okay.
Well, it's the university and the hospital. Okay, all right.
All right.
So our service arrangement with our service arrangement.
That's a strong room right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got
Our service arrangement says that the backbone piece through Round County goes here to here. It goes through the city of Moorhead. We'll service those 13 endpoints within the city, and keep me straight, I don't remember if you guys serve some of those or not. I'd have to go back and look at it, but regardless, they're serving a lot of the long laterals that come out of Moorhead to serve other adjoining counties. In those cases, then, they'll come back to Moorhead University, terminate the fibers of which they'll build or which the Commonwealth will lease into the node location, and then we'll link it back to our backbone. We're still working through some mechanics, with ourselves because, East Kentucky wants to do some different things to enhance their business model now. I understand exactly what they want to try to do, so we're still working through some of how we're going to do that. But in simplistic form, 288 count fiber goes end to end across the county. Laterals come out of Moorhead and go southeast, southwest to the adjoining counties. So again, what's your question?
Well, I guess my question is, I think I've got 14 fibers coming into my courthouse, and it sounds like I'm not going to be able to use them till 2018, 2020. But if that line is coming right within a few hundred feet of the courthouse, how do I get it hooked up to the courthouse as soon as I can, instead of waiting until the whole thing is built?
I think you're going to need to work with Mountain Rural or your local service providers on those for the use of that fiber.
Say what now?
Let me take the mic back to him.
I don't have any answers much more than what Mike has said. We certainly, all of us have found on both sides, for East Kentucky Network and our 5 telcos, we found this thing to be far more intricately complicated than you ever imagined when you start into it. And the regulatory issues that on a federal and state basis, and the legal issues on a federal and state basis are such that any part of it that you start to approach, you have to consider somewhere between a few and a few dozens of different things, and there are no simple answers to almost any of these scenarios that you present as a question. And each one of them has to be looked at in depth on a case-by-case basis to give you an answer. What it might take to get into your courthouse is going to take a number of people to sit down and look at the detailed possibilities of options, and it'd be impossible for anybody to give you a quick answer.
Thank you.
So come to 103 and maybe the question will be ripe again.
This is back to, you said there's a link or a URL that'll take us to a map that we can drill down and see the sites. Can you either show it to us or tell us what the link is?
Yeah, it's KentuckyWired.ky.gov.
Right.
And if you go into that, then there's a link somewhere on our page, and I don't remember where it is, that ultimately will get you to a KMZ file. It's a virtual map, Google Earth virtual map. If for some reason you can't find it, what I'll do is, Larry's got it. I'll send it to Larry and via the conference. However,
And then I've got my business cards back there. It's got
We'll
all my
distribute it.
contact information on it.
distribute it individually or make it available. I'm about 99% sure it's out there, but I can't tell you where on the page it is.
That's fine. I just couldn't find it on my cell phone.
Okay. I'm not the webmaster, so I'm not sure.
Well, just one more question for you, Mike, and then we'll stop the hazing. A lot of these communities are looking at local final mile projects, and some of the things that my eyes have been opened up to, just working with you over the past 3 years, have just been absolutely incredible. I had no idea of the depth of my ignorance, even after spending the last 25 years in the tech business. This is very unique in a lot of different aspects. But the point I'm trying to get to is that, is there any way for these communities to get a handle on the true cost and the true time that it's going to take to do a project? Do they need to start talking to pole owners? What advice would you give them at this stage in their development?
Each of them are unique, unfortunately. If you're in a community that already has a municipal provider, you have a different set of opportunities than perhaps somebody that the municipal is only water. Then you have to go into, you know, again, who owns the poles? Do you have access? Do you have easements and all those? If your community is already a service provider of sorts, it's a little easier. But each of them are going to be very unique in its approach. So, you know, I think, you know, I'll point back, and I haven't looked at it in a while, but Joanne and Tom and Andrew Offenbach put together some modeling tools to kind of aid and assist in some checklists. You know, the Google Fiber checklist is an example of things to look at just to help in that planning view. But my recommendation is start early and get dirty, get in the weeds, and pick it apart. Otherwise, it won't happen, because there are so many elements associated with it. But to say that one size fits all, it's a cookie cutter, it can't be. It's all going to be dependent upon who. And it gets down to who is the local pole owner in some instances. You know, it's going to get down to, do I need an independent franchise from a legal vantage point? Some say yes, some say no. There's so many working elements associated with it. I'd be lying to the audience and say this is the way you need to do it. My only advice is start early and get deep. And if you need to engage a consultant to aid in that, again, money well spent in my opinion, for especially a project of this scope and size.
Well, if I were going to court, I'd get a lawyer. So if I'm going to a project like this, I better get a consultant that knows what he's talking
Tom's
about.
got
And then right there.
Just a quick kind of addition to that. When we look at, in the past about 18 months, we've done about 30 different designs in different cities across the country. And a lot of times we're asked to say, what does it cost to build fiber to the premises? We've seen ranges of just around $1,000 a passing just for the dark fiber portion of it, to over $7,000 a passing. It very much depends on the density of the homes, the cost of construction, and a few of those other factors, but that you just see a huge range of that cost. And like, for example, Lexington was about $1,080 a passing for that estimate. In Fayette County, right around Lexington, it was a little over $7,000. And it was, but Lexington had a lot higher cost of construction, but it was really driven, the delta was really driven by the density in Fayette County with all the horse farms.
We've got Alan back here.
A little follow-up information on the last topic there, the $1,000 per home passed. In the experience that we had at Mountain Telephone with that, it was about $7,000 per home passed, and that was for the last mile only. Middle mile, electronics was already in place before you started the last mile. Last mile only there was about $7,000 per home passed was the cost to put that into place. And those are hard numbers, those are known numbers, those were true dollars. And the one thing I'll say is, as much as we understand how complex, how difficult, and how expensive this is, the end thing here is it's worth it. All right, we've all got to get there across the United States of America. We need it in every household in rural America, as well as in metropolitan America. So it's a mission that's worth working hard for as long as you have to. Stay focused, stay dedicated. When you find out what you thought was wrong, you back up and figure out another direction to go again, but you don't quit, don't stop till you get the mission accomplished.
That's right, Alan. Make sure reverse
Yes,
works
thank
well
you.
on that, because you may have to back up a time or two.
I can't top that. Let's move on.